the Italian Football Podcast.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another interview episode of the Italian Football Podcast. My name is Nima, and today I am very delighted and happy to be joined by someone who has been quite a lot mentioned quite a bit in the media the last couple of years in football with regards to football. He was linked with a very much publicized takeover bid with Manchester United, and also after that he's been linked with buying Inter Milan. However, that all came to a grinding halt because of news that he was in legal trouble, and since then a lot of mainly English-speaking media have been reporting on this, and he feels, as he's told me off air, that some of that is factually incorrect. But before we get to all of that, let me introduce him. Welcome to the Italian Football Podcast, Thomas Zilliacus. How are you doing today?
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm doing well. Thank you.
So I did interview you, just for full clarity, for Sempre Inter about a year ago, I think it was about a year ago, where we spoke about your background and where you grew up and your story in Singapore and Brazil, and I'm going to link to that interview if people want to read about your background. So we're not going to dwell too much on that. But instead, I want to begin with talking about the Manchester United takeover bid. How close were you to actually buying Manchester United?
I wasn't very close simply because I came into the race so late that Rain Group, the bank that was conducting the sale on behalf of the Glazers, apparently felt that there was no point in putting me on the same starting line as the other two main bidders, so Jim Ratcliffe and Sheikh Yazim. So I was never given access to the data room, and I put in a framework bid, and I said to Rain, I would like to proceed to get access to the data room so I can put in a much more detailed, exact bid. But I wasn't given the access to the data room, and as a result of that, my bid was on a very general basis. And as you know, Nima, I then withdrew in April when in my opinion the whole process became a bit of a farce, where bidders were asked to just put in new bids all the time. And I said, look, I have put in a bid, I have asked for access to the data room, I haven't been given it. So if that is the case, then I will not proceed with yet another bid.
I understand. So why? So you kind of answered my second question about why you pulled out of the race. However, I want to look a little bit forward now. Do you think Man United are now in good hands under the new part owner, Sir Jim Ratcliffe? And what's your perception on that entire takeover?
Yeah, well, it's a very good question, because when you say are they now in good hands, I would argue that they are still in the same hands, which is the Glazers. They still own 75%, and so Jim Ratcliffe has 25%. My understanding is, from what I have been reading in the media, that he has been given, if not full authority, but at least the main authority as comes to the footballing side of things in running the team. That I think is positive news. He is, as far as I understand, a lifelong fan of the club. He lives in England. He understands football. So his ability to build the club and to help the club and to help in a way that the fans like is of course far superior to the Glazers, who apparently never really took any big interest in the club and its well-being, and just saw it as a very lucrative financial investment.
Yeah. Other than Man United, and Inter, have there been any other clubs who you've thought about buying in recent years, and are you comfortable mentioning them by name, and how far have you gone in those talks?
Well, I've been contacted by a large number of clubs who have said, "Look, why don't you buy this club instead? It's a lot cheaper than Manchester United or Inter Milan, and it has a lot of potential." And my answer to all of these have been, "Thank you very much for contacting me, but I'm not interested." The reason is that I am not one of those investors who want to buy a trophy asset, and I call it a trophy asset because a lot of the club owners are very, very wealthy people with, in my to my understanding, uh, pretty limited understanding of football and background in football, it has become almost like a new fashion to buy a football club. It's on par with you know earlier days. It was enough to buy a new super yacht or a fancy fleet of sport cars. Now it seems to be almost a fad to own a football club or a sport club. I have zero interest in that. I have been involved in football all my life, so for me, football is I love football. It's fascinating, but I don't need a trophy asset. I have been interested to get involved in big clubs simply because one of my companies, Champion Circle, has developed a package or a platform rather with 8 different services, all aimed at providing for the fans very attractive services, but also at the same time services that the fans, because of the attractiveness of what they are being offered, will pay for. And we have done some marketing tests with some of the top clubs in the world. I can't tell their names because it's confidential, but some of the top clubs, some of the best names in the world, and we have achieved, which with just one of the 8 services, a revenue of over 400 US dollars per annum from those fans who participated and who were willing to pay for the services. So if you calculate it, Manchester United is claimed to have maybe up to 1 billion fans. So 400 times 1 billion is 400 billion. Inter Milan has maybe half of that, but that's still 200 billion. So I believe that with the big clubs and with the big global fan base, Champion Circle can generate very significant revenues. But that requires that it's a big club with a big global fan base, because these global fans cannot go to the games. They don't, for them to, even if you sit in Shanghai or in Lagos or somewhere, you can't even dream about going to Old Trafford or going to San Siro to see the game. But if we can offer services that enable those global fans to be involved in the club that they love and breathe and live 24/7 in a meaningful way, then we give them something which they love. And at the same time, we generate significant revenues for the clubs. And that is the background. These are 2 clubs that I love, Manchester United and Inter. I've loved them since I was a teenager. And I want to participate in building them into the best clubs in the world, which of course they are very close to already, but they can become even better. And that is the background. And that's why I've said no to the other clubs.
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. I want to talk a little bit about some reports that have been surfaced. We're going to get back to your ideas and how to what you want to do, because they are very interesting, and I'll pick your brain a little bit about that. But I want to touch back a little bit on recent reports in mainly British or English speaking mainstream media outlets who've reported you in a way that you're not very comfortable with. Has there been a particular report that has been particularly that you felt has been particularly egregious? Do you have any examples of what they said that you feel was not incorrect and that you want to set the record straight?
Yeah. Well, look, thank you very much for giving me that opportunity. There is an old proverb, Arab proverb, which is in use in many European countries, which is that, the dogs bark, but the caravan moves on. And that is something which I have gotten used to throughout my life. When you do things that are public, when you do things that are successful, then there's always people who are envious and who are jealous and who want to find holes, who want to criticize, even if there is no basis for it. And unfortunately, that has been the case also in my bids for these 2 clubs. So yes, there have been reports which, in my view, have been, unnecessarily nasty. I have no problem with the journalist who poses critical questions. Actually, I welcome that. I think that's what the journalist should do. But when you make insinuations, when you make claims that simply are not true or are baseless, then I think it is not good journalism anymore. Uh, I don't want to go into naming too many, examples, but I can say so much that there was one that perhaps, in my view, was the most how should I say, um, unprofessional is my view on it. And that was an article in The Athletic, which I think it was headlined something like "The Nobody Who Bid for Manchester
Mm.
United" or whatever. Well, with all due respect, I don't think I'm really a nobody. I might not be well known to a 20-something year old journalist out of the UK, but I think I set my mark in business around the world for the last 40 years. That was an article which was really based on like I said, insinuations and you know things that just were borderline to something where you could file a lawsuit for defamation, but not quite, I think, over the line. In any case, I don't want to spend my time on filing lawsuits against journalists who get pleasure from writing these kind of stories. But yeah, they are unnecessary, but life moves on. I think
Yeah.
most people, they read it and then they forget about it in a few days. So one shouldn't get hooked up on them too much oneself either.
I agree. I think that's a healthy way to look at it. But are there any particular examples that you would like to set the record straight that you feel were mischaracterized you, if not defamed you?
Well,
Uh,
I think first of all, one of the things that I which I have been unhappy with is indeed the insinuations that I have not been serious with these bids. I am dead serious with these bids, but also because I come from a very different angle than most other bidders. I think that, for example, the saying, "Oh, how can he bid? Where he doesn't have X billions." Well, I may not have X billions, and I actually have been very clear with the fact that
yeah.
when the press has called me a billionaire, I'm not a billionaire, but I have enough assets to be able to build consortiums that can table billions in offers.
Hmm.
The world is full of money that is looking for investment
Yeah.
opportunities, and I have a pretty good track record in building successful businesses. So when I present the case of how I can make a club like Inter Milan or a club like Manchester United very profitable, and through that build a club that is the number one club in the world, then investors become interested. And that is different from a multi-billionaire who wants to find a new trophy and therefore is willing to use his own money to buy a club. But like I said earlier, often with not too much understanding about how to run a football club and how to make it profitable. So those are the kind of claims that I don't like. There have, of course, been other things as well, which relating to, for example, the completely absurd stories in public about my challenges in Singapore. Uh, they are simply, I mean, absurd is the right word, and I'd be happy to tell you a bit more about it
Yeah.
if you want.
Yeah.
But that's like out of a Kafka book almost. I can't understand it.
Okay, well, let's go to those legal issues then, because I think they're far more interesting than gossiping about pseudo journalists trying to make a name for themselves and attacking you
Yeah,
without any basis for it.
yeah,
Let's talk about that. What is there were news coming out that the Interpol had a
yeah,
search had an arrest
yeah,
warrant for you.
yeah, yeah.
Now, if I'm not mistaken, you're in an EU country right now, and
Indeed,
we're
yes.
not talking from a prison cell. So,
No,
and as far as I'm aware, the EU cooperates with Interpol.
yeah.
So I want to ask: was there an arrest warrant from Interpol for you? What's the status of that
Yeah.
right now?
Well, I think before, and I answer that question, but before we go into that specific, I would like to give a little bit of background on what it is all about in Singapore. So
Mm.
I co-founded a social e-commerce company long before it became fashionable. It was in 2008, so it was in the very early days of Facebook and Amazon and all of these things. And I co-founded a company which combined social media, e-commerce, mobile games, and payments on one single platform. There is a Chinese company called Tencent, which I don't know how much it's worth today, but last time I looked, it was around 500 billion US dollars, which has a very similar platform. I was not aware of it when we co-founded this company in Singapore, which was called Yuzu. But anyway, that company was listed on the Singapore Stock Exchange in 2014. Now we took a different route than other companies in growing internationally. So instead of spending billions and billions, which we at that time didn't even have, on trying to set up offices all over the world ourselves and marketing them, we took what I call the McDonald's route, which meant that we sold licenses to franchise entrepreneurs in each market, and they took on the role of marketing in their territory. It was a very tailored platform. We made it in the local language in each country. And just like McDonald's allows you to add to the menu of Big Macs and cheeseburgers local things that attract the local market, we had exactly the same approach. So we had the local entrepreneur could add local services to what we offered globally. This was very successful, and we ended up having 63 franchisees in 25 countries who were running local operations. Now, in order to maximize the benefits for our shareholders, we decided to, instead of taking a cash fee from these entrepreneurs, we took a stake in their company. So we said, look, we want 40% ownership in your company because we believe that if you run it well, that 40% can become 100 times more valuable for our shareholders than any cash fee that you could be or we could ask you to pay now. The dispute is about the value of those shares. So we use the world's biggest audit firm, Deloitte, to do evaluation on those shares. And those were, of course, all startups. So it was based on something called discounted cash flow, which is future earnings, what they are expected to be. Deloitte did it for us, and I want to underline this: Deloitte did it,
Yeah.
not us. And Deloitte came up with a value. Now, 2, 3, whatever years later, all of a sudden, the stock exchange in Singapore says, "Oh, we think that those valuations may have been wrong." Now, a valuation is always an estimate. If you think about let's say, house, one valuer can value it at 1 million, another valuer can say, no, it's worth 1.2, and a third, no, it's worth 800,000. It's the same with shares that are based on assumptions on future earnings. So there is no absolute truth. So this was simply how should I say, administrative issue about which valuation is right. Now, normally a stock exchange would discuss with the company and come to a conclusion. But for some reason in Singapore, that was not the route that the stock exchange took. Instead, they asked the Singapore police force to investigate whether we had valued these shares wrongly. And that investigation, believe it or not, has gone on for 6 years. And for 6 years, which has destroyed the company, now then all of a sudden, out of the blue, they decide to issue, and here I come back to your original question. They decide to ask Interpol to put me on a red notice list. Now, this red notice list is for very serious offenders, people who have committed murders or rapes or whatever, and are fleeing from justice. I have not committed anything. I have not even been charged with anything. And I'm certainly not avoiding. On the contrary, I have said to the Singapore police ever since this started, please get this investigation finished so I can explain how this was all done and show that we have done nothing wrong. But we have not been given that opportunity. So the reason now that they have done this is because they say, I have refused to return to Singapore, which is completely untrue. I have not even been asked to return to Singapore before they issued this. Nobody even asked me. I read about it in the papers myself. And if somebody asked me to come to Singapore, I would say, I'd love to come to Singapore because I want to show what we have done because it was all done correctly. So it's an absolutely, like I said, absurd situation. And my lawyers have, of course, contacted Interpol and showed Interpol that I should never have been on that list in the first place. Unfortunately, Interpol moves very slowly. So I have been told it may take even months before one is removed from a list. But I know that I should never have been on that list, and everybody who knows anything about this case knows it as well.
But I mean, if you are on one of those lists, then surely there should be a warrant for your arrest out, and you should probably be in prison now, no?
Yeah, I mean it's very unpleasant to be on that list, but I mean I think Interpol, which is headquartered in France, also understands that although a member country can ask And unfortunately, there is a lot of information, a lot of news about this. If you Google it, you'll find that Interpol has been criticized for blatant misuse of this red notice. There are countries who put people on this list simply because they don't like the people, and the people that should never have been on that list in the first place. But Interpol doesn't really, seems that the system doesn't really vet. If a member country says, I want to put X on this list, you go on the list, and then that person has to appeal to Interpol to be removed, and that can take up to 9 months. But I think in the meantime, also, to be on this list is not really an issue about somebody looking for everybody on the list. It's rather so that country X has said, if you come across this person, can you please on our behalf have him arrested, because we want him. But like I said, in my case, I have not even been charged with anything. It's only that they said, under Singapore law, and I think they have decided, they have informed that they want to charge the entire board of the company because of this valuation issue, that we should have been more careful, which again I respectfully disagree with. I think we were extremely careful, but it's about reading the charges, which under Singapore law should happen in Singapore. I have said I unfortunately, because of doctor's orders, should not be flying to Singapore because I have long COVID health problems. But I would be happy to have the charges read to me anywhere else, for example, in a Singapore embassy anywhere in Europe, which by definition, the Singapore embassy is Singapore soil. So I have said, look, I'm not avoiding. I'm on the contrary. I want to know what the charges are, because I want to be able to explain why those charges are baseless. So that's the situation at the moment. So I'm in touch with the absurd thing is that I'm in touch with the Singapore police force all the time by email and letters and so forth. Not letters, but emails and other digital means. So it's an absurd situation that on one hand is this public perception that I'm avoiding something and nobody knows where I am, when de facto I'm in touch with them all the time and communicating and saying, please, let's find a solution on how you can let me know what charges you have come up with so that we can move forward.
Absolutely.
So it's a little bit, if I may say, Nima, it's a little bit different than from what you and I are used to in Europe. I mean, Singapore is a country which I admire in many ways. I've lived there for a long, long time. I'm still a permanent resident of Singapore. I think it's a fantastic country, but there are some peculiarities in how certain things are done, which are very different from how they are done in Europe. I mean, for example, basically there is a total immunity for the police. So whatever the police says or does, they are immune. You cannot sue a police, which you could do in Sweden or in Finland or in Italy or wherever. If the police says something which is not true, then you can sue them. But in Singapore, you can't. And in this case, like I said, they have claimed that I have refused to come back to Singapore, when de facto they haven't even asked me to come back to Singapore, and I wouldn't have refused if they said so.
Well, I mean, if we talk now more broadly, what's the legal status? I mean, are you under investigation? You said you haven't been charged. Is there a time frame?
Like I said, it's a 6-year investigation, which is also absolutely crazy. I mean, I go back to what I said earlier. If the stock exchange felt that the way Deloitte had valued the shares was wrong, then of course they should have contacted us and said, look, we think this may be wrong. And then we would have found a solution. We would have lowered the valuation, or we would have done whatever. I mean, it's just an asset sitting on the balance sheet. Whether it's worth 1 million or 1.2 or 800,000 doesn't really affect the company too much. I mean, we live in a world where digital companies, most of them run massive losses for many, many years, yet they're worth billions of dollars. So that was not an issue that would have been any challenge for us. And that's why it was so absurd that the stock exchange asked the police to investigate what the company that I co-founded did. After that was, wrote several letters to the Singapore Stock Exchange asking for a meeting so that the issues could be solved. But they didn't even get a reply, which also I find very strange. So like I said, investigation is finished now. And I believe that the decision is that they believe that that value should have been differently, and therefore they want the court to decide who is right and who is wrong. I can live with that. I'm fine with that. I have no problem. Like I said, I would love to go to court to present all the evidence showing that we did everything exactly correctly. So because valuations is not a legal issue. Valuations
No.
is a audit issue, a
Yeah.
financial issue, where, like I said, everybody will have a different opinion on what the exact value is. There is no exact. There is no. If I sell something for $100, then it is $100, and if I say I got 110, then I am lying. Or if I say I got 90, then I am lying. But if I get shares, which a startup share, where we do a valuation based on what we believe the earnings may be over the next 5 years, then there is no absolute truth. And there is nobody who can say, well, this expert is right and this expert is wrong. It's simply not possible to do it like that.
I mean, to put it in a football context, what I deduce from what you're saying, it's the similar situation of what a football player is worth. I mean, at the end of the day,
Precisely.
a football player is only
Precisely.
worth what the selling club is willing to accept and the buying club is willing to pay.
You are so right. It's exactly that. So as precisely as you say, there is no absolute correct value for, say, Lautaro Martinez.
No.
One club may think he's worth 100 million, another one says he's worth 60, and the third one says no, he's worth 150. Same for a club. If I want to buy Inter Milan, there is no absolute price. It's about what I believe it is worth because of future earnings and what the seller believes it's worth. So
Yeah.
you are so right. It's an exactly similar situation here where like I said, we had 63 company shares in our assets and we valued them, or actually we didn't, and I think that's also important to underline. Deloitte valued
Yeah.
them
It
and
was. Yeah.
created a formula that we then used going forward. So we used the best. Deloitte is the biggest audit firm in the world. We used the
Yeah.
best possible expert we could find in order to make sure that it was as good as it was possible. So I find this whole thing really, like I said, absurd, and I would have wished that the stock exchange would have approached this in a very different way. And look, I have no criticism towards the Singapore police, because they did their job. They were told by the stock exchange to investigate, and they investigated. The fact that it took 6 years, I think, shows the complexity and the challenges that they also realized that they had in the fact that there is no absolute correct value. So that's why I would love to have a chance to present our thoughts, why we use Deloitte, how Deloitte
Well,
did their valuation,
well,
and I'm
to
sure that
ask
we
you,
are going to be found correct.
I want to ask you about that because I mean, just finally, have you had any indication of a time frame of when you can actually get to court? Because I mean, if it's been 6 year investigation, now you say the investigation has been concluded.
Well,
Surely now, in any legal system, it's up to the prosecution to decide whether to file charges and move on and then
yeah,
set a court date,
they,
right?
the decision is to file charges. So actually, the
Okay.
CEO of the company, he's a local Singaporean. He has already been charged, and he has already attended court hearings which are ongoing.
Okay.
But they have decided, in addition to the CEO, to also charge the chief financial officer. So obviously, evaluations is something that the chief financial officer is in charge of. He then reports it to the
Okay.
CEO. The
Yeah.
CEO then reports it to the audit committee of the board, and
Yeah.
the audit committee of the board reports it to the board, who then puts the stamp of approval. I was chairman of the board, so what they have decided there is, in addition to charging the CFO and the CEO, also all the board members will be charged
Okay.
for, I assume, valuing shares wrongly, or me being careless or whatever. I don't. And but again, like I said, I don't know what the charges are, so I can't say. But I
Okay.
assume it's similar to what the CEO basically has been charged with being
Okay.
careless.
And
Now,
have we reached the verdict stage of any of those legal
no,
proceedings?
no, no, no.
Okay.
Well, no verdict has been given, and
Okay.
and I'm not privy to whether he has, agreed
Yeah.
to plead guilty, or whether he's challenging it. I don't know, but that's a completely different thing again, because the CEO in any company, he is in charge of the operations. He's operationally responsible. The board sets the strategic framework for the company, appoints the CEO, but the board doesn't get involved in the details of any operations, including valuation. So that's why I also feel that even if he would have been careless, which I do not believe he was, then I don't really see how that would mean that the board also would then be seen the same way, because the board's role is completely
different, yeah. But I mean, that's a matter of law, and that needs to be litigated, and I'm sure it will be.
Exactly. And
Yeah,
I have, like I said, I have no problem whatsoever in going to court and attending it and presenting our facts. And if even after that the court says no, you were careless, then so be it, and we move on. I mean, it's like I said, it's not exactly a question about murder or rape
no,
or serious
no,
fraud.
no,
It's
no,
about
no, no, no.
whether a value of X was correct, or whether it should have been X plus one or X minus one.
And whether or not, from what I understand, whether or not the correct procedures were applied when making that evaluation, which makes it more of a
Correct,
question
and
of
that is a
law.
very good point, because there again, going back to what I already said, I mean, you can't if you have the biggest audit firm in the world doing the valuations, then you can't really go any higher. And already when this whole investigation started way back in 2018, I had Singapore's best lawyer, who has been by third parties elected as the top lawyer in Singapore. He wrote a lengthy document of 30 plus pages to the Singapore police who was investigating it, showing that not only had I followed all the right steps and procedures, I de facto had gone, as he wrote, way out of what could have been reasonably expected in order to make sure that everything was correct. So we had, in addition to Deloitte, we had KPMG, another big four, involved in this, and we had the best law firms in Singapore looking through everything, and we had a big investment bank, Macquarie Capital, going through everything. So we had all the experts you can imagine, basically, because I said, look, I want to be sure that we have not left a single stone unturned in doing our job in the best way possible. And that's what we did. So, I mean, against that backdrop, once again, to me, it's absurd to have this whole thing investigated by the police when it could have been settled. And by the way, in the meantime, a company was destroyed that could have been worth I don't know. I don't even want to think about how much it could have been worth, but I can tell you that there was another company also based in Singapore that basically had exactly the same platform as what we had. They Maybe we should have done the same thing. Instead of listing in Singapore, they listed in New York, on the New York Stock
Mm,
Exchange. In November 2022, they were valued at 197 billion US dollars,
mm,
with the same platform, but with only a fraction of the markets that we were in. So one could well argue that if we had been allowed to just continue, we would have been worth the same. Having said that, Singapore companies or companies on the Singapore Stock Exchange rarely reach those kind of valuations. But hey, I would have been happy with 10% of that. So
Okay, but I mean, let's move away from this a little bit, because I mean,
yeah,
I know that there've been other legal issues as well, which I know you
yeah,
resolved. And there was a case of in New York, which you settled out of court, and there was
yeah,
no admission of guilt.
yeah.
Um, and so I want to move away a little bit from all of that, because that's been
Yeah. But
resolved.
if I can just say on that one, because that is such a perfect example of how there are always opportunists who see success and they want to have a share of it. So the whole New York thing was something that I was not involved in any way. It was one of my co-founders of the company who sold some shares to some investor in New York, and those investors were unhappy then with some things that had happened there, and they filed a lawsuit in New York where they did not only sue this seller, but they sued everybody that they could imagine who had, almost the cleaner of the of the office of the company was sued, because they sued the wife of the guy who had nothing to do with it, and they sued me. And I said, I haven't even heard about the whole story. I know nothing about it. But then my lawyers in the US said that, look, unfortunately, if you go to court in the US, your legal bill can run up very, very high. So
Mm,
what we suggest is that all of you who have been sued, you gather together and you settle it. It was a relatively small sum. It was, I think, $200,000 or whatever. So it was settled without any admission of guilt, because like I said, I didn't even know that these people existed before before the lawsuit came. So, but it always happens. This always happens when you have a high profile and you have successful businesses. Somebody says, there is an opportunity, maybe we can sue him for something, and maybe he would rather pay than go to court, even if he's not guilty. And that unfortunately happens.
Yeah, it does. Right, I want to move away from this. I want to talk a little
Yeah.
bit because, like, what I remember when this all kind of broke,
Yeah.
you officially announced that you left the bidding process to buy Inter,
Mm.
and I want to talk to you. I want to begin there.
Mm.
Is this still the case? Are you completely out of the race to buy Inter?
No, I'm not completely out of the race because I want to be out of the race. I had to do this simply because one unfortunate byproduct of all this negative publicity and all these stories about Interpol and arrest and this and that, of course, affects people who read it. I understand it perfectly. If I was reading about somebody in the newspapers, and I was reading that he's wanted by Interpol and the Singapore government, whatever, I would assume that he must be, something must be wrong. The guy has committed a crime or whatever, because that's the natural way that people think. So the result was that some investors who already had committed verbally to be partners in the consortium withdrew, said, "Look, until this whole thing is settled, we can't move." So I had to therefore announce that I can no longer proceed because of these false claims, and I call them false claims because, like I told you already earlier, they are false claims. So I had to, but that doesn't mean that I don't want to continue. And maybe the silver lining now is that I don't know what I only know as much as, maybe you know even more, but I only know what I read in the media, and the media is saying that nothing seems to be happening. The Oak Tree loan is due in I think less than a month now, or maybe exactly a month. I think it's on the 20th of May. So it could well be that Oak Tree takes over, and then obviously there is a new period of I don't know how much when, because Oak Tree is not for sure not a company that wants to own a football club long term. So maybe there is an opportunity to re-enter the discussions and negotiations once this thing is cleared with Singapore, and once I have been able to prove
Mm.
to everybody that it was a storm in a water glass, and there was nothing wrong there.
So just to be clear, until these Singapore allegations or the legal status of what's happening
Yeah.
in Singapore have been resolved, you're not going to actively be in the process to try to buy Inter or any other football club.
No, because like I
Good.
said, the
Yeah. No, good.
investors, and
Yeah.
and I
Yeah.
fully
Of course.
understand them. I'm not
Yeah.
in any
Yeah.
way,
No, I just wanted to
complaining about
clarify.
it.
I just wanted to clarify on that.
Yeah, they are the ones who say, "Hey, this has
Okay.
to be solved first."
Well, now that you're out of
Yeah,
those talks,
yeah.
can you reveal anything of the talks you had with Suning to buy Inter? I mean, how advanced were they? Was there an actual bid presented, and
Yeah,
how did they react to it? And can you give
yeah,
us some sort of insight into that?
yeah. No, it was very advanced. It was very advanced, and in actual fact, when this news broke in late February, we were very very close to, uh, I think, wrapping the whole thing up. I mean, we had committed investors. We had a consortium. We had made a bid. We made the bid, first bid we made already back in almost a year ago in May. No, sorry, the discussion started in May. We made it in July, and then we made a second bid in November. Why a second bid? Because we wanted to update the July bid uh, on the basis of certain things that had happened in between. But it was a very serious bid. It was a complete bid. I had as my advisors, and again, I can't give the names of companies, but it was one of the largest investment banks in the world, a name that everybody knows. They were with offices in all the major financial centers, including Milan. So they had a big team working on this together with me, and we had, on top of that, we had advisors from Italy, we had lawyers, we had auditors, we had people who had been on the board of Inter, people who really knew the ins and outs of everything. So we had a very very good bid in my view, and very detailed bid. Uh,
Was
now,
it was it for
what
the
I
whole?
think,
Was it
sorry,
just a quick follow up?
yeah,
Was it for the entire club or was
yes,
it for parts
yes.
of it?
No, it was for the entire club. It was for the 100%, the whole club.
Okay.
And my view is that I always had a good communication with Suning and Steven Zhang. I didn't meet him many times, because, as you know, he hasn't. I think he has been now in China since, I don't know, July of last year or whatever. Hasn't been back in Italy. But before that, when we met, uh, I felt immediate the first time we met, which was in May of last year. I felt immediate liking for him. I mean, I think he's an amazing guy. He came to Milano at the age of 26 without any football background, and he managed to get the big Inter organization with some very senior people who had been in football for umpteen years to listen to him. So I think he did a fantastic job. I have full admiration for him. Now, why they wanted to sell, I don't really know, and it doesn't really matter to me what the thing was. But that was anyway the process. I mean, otherwise, obviously, we wouldn't have done a bid unless we were told that they had a serious interest to sell. Whether that interest then changed in the process, I really don't know. Maybe it did. Maybe it did because Inter is doing so well now, and maybe they regretted the situation, and maybe they said, no, we want to hang on to this. But I think it is extremely challenging because of the big debts that Inter has, and therefore, I. But if I may go a little bit, to something that has kind of come up during this
Mm.
1 year now plus since I first made the bid for Manchester United and then Inter, is that I have also come to the realization that for the really big clubs like Inter, like Manchester United, they don't really need, wealthy, be billionaires or consortium, whatever, to bid or to buy, to own the clubs. In actual fact, I think it is almost it's bad for the club. Why? Because you come into exactly these kind of situations where all of a sudden an owner, for whatever reason, cannot continue or doesn't want to continue, and then a new owner comes in and it disrupts everything. I am more and more of the opinion that the best model for the big clubs, because the big clubs, they don't need a wealthy billionaire to finance them. Going back to what I said earlier about our Champion Circle platform, they can finance themselves when they have enough funds. And that goes back to the model that we have in Germany, in the Bundesliga, Bayern Munich, Dortmund, and also some clubs in Spain, Barcelona, Real Madrid, which are owned by the fans. I think, well, we all know that some of the Spanish clubs might not be, or Barcelona in particular has its own challenges, but that is then a management issue. But the fact that the fans control the club, I think it is a very healthy situation. And frankly, I've been also thinking now with Inter and Manchester United as well. Maybe I should instead try to work together with the fans in building something that can lead to the fans taking control of the club, and thus having a continuity that is not dependent on billionaire X from the US or billionaire Y from the Middle East coming in and then exiting a few years later.
Mm. Well, I just wanted to talk. I want to just to build on that. Um, on the Inter talks. I mean, you said that they were very advanced. Your feeling was that it was close to being concluded already in February. That's only 2 months
Yeah,
ago.
yeah,
That suggests to me that the due diligence was done. That suggests to me that the bidding process was well underway. There was an
yeah.
offer, a concrete offer, under the table. On the table, there was an actual evaluation
Yeah.
process completed, and that you had made an offer that Suning had indicated that they were willing to accept.
Yes.
Okay.
Well,
That,
the last part I cannot say that they had indicated that they were willing to accept, because that feedback did not come. But
okay.
we know more or less what the expectation was as comes to what the club was worth or
Mm,
is worth.
mm,
And
okay.
we were on that level in our offer.
Okay.
But
Okay.
everything else, what you said, is exactly correct. It was the due diligence had been done. We had a complete, concrete offer for the whole club with an exact value that we wanted to pay. Everything was there. It was not, going back to your initial question about Manchester United, there we never came that far. But with Inter, it was a completely different situation because we had time to prepare. And like I said, having one of the biggest investment banks in the world with all their resources, who have been involved in many similar offers and deals, made all the difference. So it was a complete offer, And
So
but
the
again, I
investment.
cannot say that Suning was willing to accept it, because that I
No.
don't know. But I can say that the offer was on a level that we know was, you know,
Hmm.
very close or similar to what the expectations were.
So just to understand a little bit more about the structure of the bid presented,
Yeah, yeah,
so this investment bank. So I mean, you said you'd built a group of financiers, which is very similar to kind of what Redbird do and have done with Milan.
yeah,
I'd say. I mean, they're a group of
yeah,
investors. They fundraise and then they invest in
yeah,
specific investments. But
yeah.
the role of this investment bank, was it as advisor? Was it as a financier? Like, what can you tell us
Yeah.
just briefly
So,
about that?
so the role of this specific bank that I was referring to before was purely as an advisor. But
Okay.
being a global, one of the biggest investment banks in the world, with offices, like I said earlier already, in all the major financial centers across the world, in Americas, in Europe, in Middle East, in Asia, everywhere. They, of course, have a tremendous network of potential investors. So they, and then we appointed another. Again, I'm not allowed to give the name, but
Mm,
a U.S. based, New York based investment bank specialized in American fundraising primarily, but also with a global network. So these two jointly brought in big private equity firms, family offices, and then of course I have my own network as well. So we had a consortium, and as you were referring to Redbird, very
mm,
similar, a consortium that was willing to move ahead with the money that was required. And on top of that money to further, then develop and build the club. So everything was there, everything was ready, but it all fell apart because of these
mm.
false claims that came out of
Cool.
Singapore.
So
And yeah,
I just wanted to ask you, just to move away from that. Just, I mean, because
yeah,
there's been some criticism from Inter fans and also Italian journalists
yeah,
in that the way that you speak on social media, that they
yeah,
feel that there's very little action from you in buying Inter,
right,
and a lot of
yeah,
talk. What would you say
yeah.
to that?
Yeah, well, I'm grateful that you brought that up, because that, of course, is complete nonsense. I mean, yes, I have been very active on social media, because that's just the way how I see the world. I like to communicate, especially with the fan base, because, like I said so many times, without the fans there is no club, and with the fans, the club literally could be self-sustaining, as I have explained here earlier. So I want to communicate with the fans. I want to let the fans know what I think and what I want to do. But I've seen the same comments that you were referring to, that they have said, oh, but don't talk so much, do something, buy the club. But buying a football club is not like, going to the supermarket to buy food. It's there on the shelf, the food, and there is a price, and if you pay the price, the food is yours. With the football club, it's of course completely different. So, like I said, behind the scenes, but this is something which we simply couldn't tell on social media or anywhere else what
No,
was going on all the time. But I can assure you that like I said, one of the biggest investment banks in the world wouldn't commit their resources, and those resources in number of people involved was very significant to something that wasn't dead serious. So we were working constantly, communicating, building, getting all the investors in. I mean, we talked to, I don't know, probably 100 different big names about joining. Some of them, and actually, surprisingly, many of them said no, because they felt that Inter was too risky as an investment
hmm
with all the debt. But we managed to get some who were willing to take that risk, and especially because we could present to them our plan on how we could generate these fan services that would, or build these fan services that would generate a lot of new income. So there was tons of work being done all the time, and it was certainly not just talking on social media.
No, no, I understand that you feel that way, and but I mean, I assume that must have been very frustrating for you not be able to talk. But then on
Yeah,
the other hand, I suppose you could say, well, since you kind of speak a lot and are very active on social media, that kind of opens you up to that kind of criticism, because obviously people can only
yeah.
react to what they see. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. Absolutely agree with that. I have no problems at all with people being critical and voicing their issues and voicing their concerns. So no. I fully
Mm,
understand. And again, I go back to what I said earlier, that these are people who, in many cases they live and breathe and love the club 24/7. I mean, the club is maybe the most important thing in their lives. So
mm,
for them to see somebody, first of all, to see the club that they love maybe not being managed the way they would like to see it being managed, and then to have somebody who is on social media talking about what he wants to do, the natural reaction indeed would be, well, come on, do something, don't just talk. But again, that is because these people are not privy to how the process is ongoing all the time, nor do they probably understand how complicated it is from getting from the starting point to the finish. But like I said, I fully understand them, and I have no problems at all in them being critical.
okay. Speaking of being, criticism and a positive one, you've been very vocal, positive about Stephen Zhang and Suning in the past. But do you think perhaps that it's time for them to sell the club? Because as what we've heard now is that they're actually close to refinancing the Oak Tree loan, but with someone else,
Mm,
or even with Oak Tree. I mean, if that were to happen, that would be
yeah,
kicking the can down the road.
yeah.
So what's your perceptive? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, you know what? As a fan myself, but as a fan that is not just a fan, but also has the capability to build a consortium that can buy the club. Yes, my answer is yes. I think it's time to sell the club because as you said, it's kicking down the can. It's kicking the can down the road. The debts are already very large, and if they will become even larger, if the Oak Tree loan is just replaced by a new loan, because there is a massive interest, and that has ballooned the loan quite significantly. At the same time, uh, I don't really see it as normal. I have no idea what the reasons are, but I don't see it as very normal that the chairman of the club has not been in Italy now for close to a year. So I don't think that's the way the club should be run. I think it requires somebody who is present there all the time. So yes, I think it is time. But it goes back to what I said earlier, that maybe it's a time to rethink the whole thing. That maybe there could be a way of restructuring this so that the fans take over that stake. I mean, look, I just saw an interview with Inter CEO just a couple of days ago, where he said that Inter has 750 million fans around the world. I earlier have heard a little bit more than, a little bit over 500 million. But either one of them is big enough to literally, if each fan would pay the price of one cup of coffee in whatever bar they are frequenting, they could buy the club. So to me, that approach would be really attractive, and I would love to work with them, with the fans, in building that offer, and then bringing in the champion circle services, which then would keep the club running in a way that would enable Inter to buy all the best players in the world, and become,
But there was
you
there
know,
was something similar in Italy called Interspac. Who, I
yes,
mean, I don't know if you know about that. I
I
mean, is that
know.
yeah? I mean, is that the kind of format you're looking at?
Not really, not really, because Interspec was more, and I may be wrong here because I know about them, but I don't know all the details because it was before I became involved. My understanding is that was more a group of wealthy Inter fans who, not the average, fan who has no money but a passion for the club, but rather wealthy Inter fans, and no disrespect at all to them. They are just as welcome as any other fan. But I think it was limited, in the number of people who were involved in that interspec. But I think the thinking was the same, that why can't the fans take over? But what I am saying, let's not forget that Inter has the vast majority of Inter fans are not in Milan, not even in Italy. They are around the world. I mean, China alone, and that is probably partly because of Suning, has something like 200-300 million fans of Inter, only in
Mm,
China. So
mm.
my idea of doing this is to involve all the fans globally and make it possible to them to interact with the club that they love in a much more meaningful way than just watching a game on TV. I don't want to tell what the services are, because we are at the moment filing a patent for the platform, and before the patent has been has been filed. I don't want or I can't say all the details. But like I said, going back to what I mentioned earlier, $400 per participating fan. I mean that alone makes far more money if we get the fans involved and engaged than all of Inter's revenues from everything else. Sponsorships, ticket sales, Champions League fees, everything. Far more can be generated from these fan services.
Yeah, because I wanted to, I'm glad you brought that up because I wanted to ask you about that because you always speak about ways to innovate the fan experience, and I know that you're waiting for the patents to go through so no one steals your idea. But what can you tell us about these ideas that you have?
Well, I mean, they are all related to my background as a technology entrepreneur. So it's about using technology in innovative ways. And they're actually, time just makes this more and more exciting because today we have technologies that we didn't have a few years back when we did this initial test where we made more than $400. Like I said, with just one service, and that means that now we have multiple services at all. I'm not saying that they all will make $400, but even if we are very conservative and we say that only let's say that only 10% of the 10% of the global fan base participate in some way, and we take the lower estimate of 500 million fans, 10% is 50 million fans. If we have $10 from each one of them instead of $400, and now we talk about 8 services instead of one, 10 times 50 is 500 million. 500 million is about 2 times as much as all the revenue that Inter is generating today from all the other sources. And those sources would, of course, not finish. They would be there. So on top of the 300 plus million that Inter now is making, there could be another 500 million, 800 million, which means that from making a loss like they did in the last financial year. Now I think the last quarter they were actually profitable, but last financial year, or at least the latest financial figures I have seen, I think they made a loss of around 80 million. So going from minus 80 to plus 400 or whatever, imagine what that would do for the club and its
Mm.
ability to buy the best possible players that there is in the world. So I mean, to me, that is just a dream come true for a big club like Inter, and that's what we can do.
Mm. Okay, well, I want to talk a little bit about the football as well. I mean, but before we get to that, speaking of revenue, one of the things that Suning and Inter have tried to do is to build a new stadium. But the
Yeah.
red tape in Italy, it doesn't seem to allow them or Milan to do it. What
Mm,
is your position on that stadium issue? Do you think
yeah.
that Inter and Milan should leave the San Siro? Do you think they should tear it down? Do you think they should build elsewhere separately
Mm,
together?
mm.
What are your thoughts?
Well, San Siro is of course a an icon and a landmark, and I mean San Siro is up there with Wembley and with other famous stadiums around the world. So because of the history, I would love a solution where San Siro can be refurbished, modernized so that it meets all the demands of a modern stadium. And that is important for the fans because it makes watching a game so much more comfortable, but also for the club because modern stadium today brings in a lot of money from hospitality events or hospitality suites in the stadium, and that is something that San Siro doesn't really have today or has it in a very very small capacity. However, I've been told by people who have studied this that it is extremely difficult to do so, and that therefore a new stadium would be a much better option. So if that is the case, then sadly my vote would then go for building a new stadium because of its financial implications. Now, I fully understand that politicians see this differently, and they don't want to. They are voted in by their voters, and if the voters don't want to see the clubs leave San Siro, then the politicians will obviously, in their own interest, say no, you have to stay. But I would hope that common sense would prevail in this, and everybody would see that what is beneficial for the club is also beneficial for the society as a whole and the community,
Mhm.
and therefore to build a new club, a new stadium, I think is the best option. I have been involved myself in when I was one of my companies was a co-owner of the Finnish ice hockey champions, a club called Jokerit. We
Yeah.
built a new stadium in Helsinki, and it had a tremendous positive impact on everything. The
The
club, the
Hartwall
fans,
Arena,
everything.
right? The Hartwall
Exactly,
Arena. Yeah.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Which sadly today is owned by Russian interests who are under the
Sanctions,
blockage,
no?
and
Yes.
so the whole stadium has been
Yeah.
standing empty now for 2 years.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's a different story. But
Yeah.
exactly. So that's my view on the stadium. And also, let's not forget the stadium, as I already did kind of mention, is that it has a massive financial impact on the club as well. So
Mm.
every match would generate so much more money. And obviously, the club is not a real estate developer, but there are a lot of real estate developers that I know would be very keen to come in and build a stadium. And the
Mm.
stadium, of course, today a modern stadium is no longer just a stadium. It is a complex which has around it, can be apartments, can be shopping centers, can be all kinds of things that also make it into an alive place, not only when there are games, but 24/7 throughout the year.
Mm. So I wanted to ask you a little bit about the European Super League, which has been,
Yeah.
there's been quite a lot of legal tangling, and the EU, the ECJ came with a verdict in November or December, if I remember correctly.
Mm,
What it seems that the legal issue surrounding that has now been cleared. But
mm.
what is your position of the creation of the European Super League versus the current the status quo, so to speak?
Well, it's a little bit same as with the stadium in the sense that if you can fix something that is already there, then that's always a better option. And as comes to the Champions League and as comes to UEFA, I don't see that it would be in such a bad shape that it would have to be replaced by something else. I mean, obviously the Super League is driven by financial interest, but while I love to watch the big clubs play against each others, I love even more to see an underdog coming up and succeeding against the big giants, and that kind of would be almost made impossible by the Super League. So even if the legal hurdles are cleared, I still I'm a football romantic in that respect. That I still believe that it's better to have an open competition where any team from anywhere can become the Champions League winner, and so therefore, yeah, I prefer to modernize the Champions League in whatever ways are needed.
Hmm, that's fair enough. I wanted to, I want to talk a little bit more about what your thoughts are on Inter today and this season and under the current financial parameters that Inter have been.
Yeah.
And how well, first of all, let's start with the leadership. You mentioned Beppe Marotta. We've already
Yeah.
spoken very highly of Stephen Zhang, and you said that you found it really problematic that the owner can't be there, or
Mm.
isn't there, I should rather
Yeah.
say.
Yeah.
What are your do you know Beppe Marotta? What's your relationship with him, and what do you think of him?
No, I don't know him. I don't know him. I met the Inter management. Let me see now. I think I only met them once. Then I had a couple of video conferences with them when we were preparing the bid. But no, I don't know Beppe Marotta. But everybody who knows him speaks highly of him. I have read an interview with him recently where he said that he wants to leave. I think it was in 27 or whatever
Yeah,
the year,
yeah,
and he wants to focus on youth football. And I like that approach very much because I 100% agree with him. I mean the backbone of Inter Milan as a or any football club for that matter is to have a strong youth program. And look at Barcelona. I mean, it's just unbelievable how all these youngsters come up from Barcelona's junior squads and are ready players when they're 16 or 17. So to me, if Beppe would be willing to continue in that position, and I had the privilege of being involved as an owner, then I would love that. And it of course doesn't mean that his expertise in finding good players outside of the youth system could not still be used. So I have said that I don't want to really comment on the Inter Milan management because I don't know them well enough. But before until I get to know them better. But in general, I would say that any organization needs new blood every now and then. But also, most organizations do not react well to dramatic radical changes. So one has to be very careful in not destroying something that is good in order to make it even better. But I think, like I said, there is probably room for some modernization, some improvements, without tearing down the structures.
Mm, that's fair. But I want to talk a little bit about the football itself. I mean, how do you rate Inter's season? A lot of Inter fans are obviously very disappointed about with the Champions League exit.
Yeah.
Others feel that, given the financial disparity between Serie A clubs in general and the Premier League, it's
Mm,
always going to be a pipe dream for a Serie A club to win the Champions League. And that last season when they reached the final was more, not fluke, but it was more down to chance and maybe a favorable draw and so on and so forth, even though they did really
mm,
well in the final itself.
mm,
But
mm.
they are on the verge of winning the Scudetto for the second star, the 20th Serie A title,
Yeah.
having won the Supercoppa for the third year in a row. How would you rate Inter's season on the pitch?
Yeah, look, I think what you said is very true. I mean, there is a challenge because of the limited financials of Italian clubs compared to the giants from some other European nations. So yeah, last year I think that's correct. What you said that last year was the sum of course a good team, but also some lucky coincidences. And going back to what I said earlier, what I want to do, the reason I'm interested to be involved, either as an owner or as a co-owner or as a partner, whatever form, because I want to build the club. I don't look for trophies. I want to build a club, and I want to build a club in a way where it financially can compete with anybody else. So I want to see Inter in a place. I think the closest similarity is Real Madrid. I mean, a club that every year is one of probably two favorites to win the Spanish Liga, but also is a permanent contender for the Champions League. And I want to
Mm.
see Inter Milan in that same position where nobody can say, "Oh, but it's a pipe dream. They can't compete." They can compete if we are running it the right way, and if we bring in these new revenue sources. Then Inter Milan can compete with any team in the world, and that's where I want to see Inter Milan in the future. Having said that, I think it's almost a blessing in disguise probably this year that Inter had some limitations on its financials, because I think also Inzaghi has managed to create a team that plays together, where everybody plays for everybody. And that's what football is all about. I mean, we have such good examples of clubs that have bought all the best stars in the world because they had unlimited funds. And I go, PSG is by far the best example, where they never really reach. Well, who knows, maybe this year they finally will, but haven't reached that pinnacle where they have been wanting to be every year, simply because there are too many stars. And stars don't gel into a team automatically. I mean, sometimes they can, but in so many cases, each star thinks, "I am the star, everybody else should support me." And that's not how football is played. So Inter has a fantastic team with an amazing team spirit. And therefore, to me, it's very hard to say, if somebody asked me, "So who should be brought into Inter?" Well, I think then the question also is, well, who should then let go? And right now, I think every single player in Inter is filling his position in a fantastic way. And there are some amazing. I mean, there are some players who have just performed. Actually, the whole team has performed, I think, very, very well this year. The Champions League, yes, that was a bit of a disappointment. There's no, uh, you can't avoid that fact. But it's yeah. Going back to what you said yourself earlier about the restrictions and so forth, the financial restrictions, I guess we have to be realistic in that sense, and accept the fact that there is more money needed to build Inter Milan into a team that can really be in the final and win it every year.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. That would be the dream of all Inter fans, of course. So you mentioned Simone Inzaghi. I mean, since he's come to Inter, he came in a very difficult financial situation, and I saw a report in Italian media that he's earned his clubs over almost €500 million off the pitch in terms of sporting success and so on and so forth. but also the football is some, some Inter fans would say that this is the most beautiful football they've ever seen Inter play. How do you rate his work? Because you mentioned the teamwork as well, but how would you rate his overall work?
I would rate it very, very high. I mean, the fact that he has, with the limitations that he has been given by the management, as comes to how much money can be spent, I think he has done an amazing job. I don't have the privilege of knowing him personally, but he must be a fantastic personality also in being able to gel these players together into the fantastic team that Inter is today. And you mentioned, beautiful football. Yes, I think Inter is playing beautiful football, and Inter also is now in a position where they have that ability that Manchester United had under Alex Ferguson, where even when games are very tight, somehow they always squeeze that one goal that is needed to win the game, and that's what a good team does when it is led by a good charismatic manager that the players believe in. And that's again going back to this whole issue about continuity. So I think the longer you have, and Alex Ferguson was a good example again when he was I don't know for how many years at the head of Manchester United. So he was the undisputed authority in the team, and it's the same thing I think with Inzaghi, that he's building that position where players believe in him and in his leadership. Which is not the case when you keep on changing managers, come and
Mm,
go, and they are not even a whole season or a whole year, with the club. Players, how do you build respect with the players if every player thinks, well, he's going to be gone in a few months anyway, so who cares?
yeah.
So I take my hat off to Inzaghi, and I really would wish that he continues with Milan, and I would wish that we would be able to get to that situation where the new revenue streams could enable him and the management to reach out to for any player that they want.
Mm, agreed. Just before we let you go, we play this a little fun game to end all our interviews. It's a rapid fire game. I just basically give you a couple of two or three options, and you pick one, and you don't have to explain
Okay.
if you don't want to. If you want to, you can. Okay.
Yeah.
So the first one, everyone in the world, I think, has been asked this: Cristiano Ronaldo or Lionel Messi?
Messi.
Diego Maradona or Pele?
Pele.
Hmm. Paolo Maldini, Franco Baresi.
Baresi.
Zlatan Ibrahimovic or Marco van Basten?
Hey, I'm from Scandinavia. I have to say Zlatan.
Finland to win the ice hockey world championships and Olympics, or Inter under your ownership to win the Champions League and the Serie A?
Inter to win the Champions League and Serie A under my ownership. Finland has already won the ice hockey world championship and the Olympics, so we don't need to do it again.
And finally, because I know you have a house in Italy and you are in Italy quite a lot.
Yeah.
Finally, pineapple on pizza, food heaven or food hell?
Food hell.
That's the
I
right
think
answer.
pineapple pizza is. I've been told it's actually a Finnish invention, and I'm very sorry that is the case because I don't think it should be there at all.
I thought it was a Swedish one because or it was from there, but yeah, it
Maybe
could be.
it's a Nordic. Maybe it's a Nordic one.
Yes,
Yeah.
it is. It is.
Maybe it's the poor people, the poor souls of Finland and Sweden who live in the cold and darkness most of the year and who love the south and the pineapples and all of this, that they just want it in everything.
I agree. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. And we would love to have you on in the future once you know what's happened with all of this, with the
Yeah.
situation. And if you have any other, if you bid again for Italian football, because you do have some interesting ideas about innovation in football generally, which I think football, who is very very stuffy. And have a very old-fashioned way of viewing things. I think it's always good to open the windows.
Well, thank
So
you.
thank you so much.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I'd love to be back again. And indeed, the filing of the patent is being done as we speak for the Champions Circle platform, and that also means that we can, I think, very soon tell all the details about what it is, and hopefully, even if the Inter Milan situation doesn't get solved in the way that I and my consortium could come in as owners, maybe we at least could come in as partners and generate those additional revenues that would delight the fans and make Inter the best club in the world.
That's every Inter fan would loves to hear that. Right, everyone else, thank you so much for listening. We'll be back on next week on Tuesday, because obviously the Milan derby's on Monday and the Scudetto could be decided. So we're going to do the full weekend review as we always do on Tuesday as opposed to Monday. But until next time, take care of yourselves and each other. Ciao, ciao.